You've spent years building a life that looks whole on the outside, yet something inside still aches quietly, endlessly. You've achieved things, crossed milestones, smiled in photographs. And yet, when the noise fades, there's a whisper that asks, who am I beneath all this? It's not depression. It's not failure. It's the soul's subtle rebellion against the mask you've been forced to wear. You feel it in those moments of sudden emptiness, when the laughter around you no longer touches you, when the mirror becomes unfamiliar. That's the beginning of shadow work, the moment the unconscious begins to stir and call you home. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that's what this ache really is, the echo of all that's been buried. The parts of you that were exiled long ago because someone told you they were unworthy of love. The anger you suppressed to be accepted. The desires you silenced to appear pure. The grief you swallowed so you wouldn't seem weak. Every repressed emotion becomes a ghost in the basement of your psyche, and over time, the house starts to shake. You start to feel haunted by your own reflection, repeating mistakes you swore you'd never make, attracting people who wound you in familiar ways, sabotaging your happiness right when you're about to grasp it. The shadow isn't evil. It's wounded. It carries the fragments of your abandoned self, waiting not for punishment, but for reunion. Shadow work isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering yourself. About opening the locked doors inside and sitting with what you once feared to see. And if you're here, listening, it means some part of you is ready to turn inward, ready to descend into the underworld of your own mind. Not to be destroyed by it, but to be reborn through it. Because the light you seek will never be found by running from the dark. It's hidden within it. Asterisk, before we continue deeper, if you feel the resonance of this truth, if something inside you recognizes its own reflection in these words, take a breath and stay with me. The journey ahead will not be easy, but it will be real. If you wish to keep walking this path, this inner pilgrimage toward wholeness, you can help more souls find it too. A simple gesture, liking, subscribing, sharing, helps the message of healing reach those still trapped in silence. Now, let's go deeper into the first descent, where the shadow first takes form. Asterisk, it begins quietly, almost imperceptibly. You wake one day and realize you no longer recognize the life you've built. The things that once defined you, your job, your relationships, your ambitions, all feel strangely hollow. You smile, you nod, you perform the rituals of daily existence, but behind your eyes, something has gone dim. This is not the death of meaning, it's the withdrawal of the self. The psyche has decided, it's time to confront what's been ignored. At first, you try to outrun it. You fill your calendar. You scroll, you consume, you distract yourself. But the emptiness grows louder. It's not interested in your excuses or your productivity. It wants your truth. The unconscious begins to surface through dreams, through slips of the tongue, through inexplicable moods that feel too heavy for their causes. You start to feel like a stranger in your own story. This is the psychological threshold Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious. It's not mystical in the way people imagine, it's visceral. It's the moment you stop projecting your inner conflicts onto the world and begin to realize the enemy has always been within. Every argument, every heartbreak, every betrayal was a mirror reflecting what you refused to acknowledge in yourself. The lover who neglected you revealed your own neglect. The friend who lied showed you your own dishonesty. The world becomes a living Rorschach, forcing you to read the ink blots of your own soul. And yet, part of you resists. Because to face your shadow is to admit that the person you think you are, the persona you've so carefully curated, is incomplete. It means the good person you've tried to be also contains the capacity for cruelty, envy, selfishness, and shame. It means you are not who you appear to be. And that realization shakes the ego to its core. This is why Jung called shadow work a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Because to integrate the shadow, you must first accept your own contradictions, the saint and the sinner, the healer and the destroyer, the lover and the one who wounds. Most people cannot bear this tension. They retreat into denial, projecting their darkness onto others, calling it evil, corrupt, or wrong. But what they truly condemn outside themselves is what they fear to see within. You've done it too. We all have. You've hated others for embodying what you secretly longed for. You've judged the arrogance you wished you could express. You've envied the freedom you were too afraid to claim. The shadow reveals itself through the emotions we find hardest to admit. Every irritation, every disgust, every moral outrage is a clue, the psyche's way of saying, this too is you. If you look closely, you'll notice a strange paradox. The people who trigger you most often carry the traits you've buried deepest. The loud, confident person who makes you uncomfortable reminds you of your own silenced voice. The manipulative one mirrors your suppressed desire for control. The selfish one exposes the part of you that has given too much for too long. And when these realizations dawn, something begins to shift. The world no longer feels like a battlefield between good and evil, but a mirror of your own divided self. You start to see that what you've called fate or bad luck might just be the unconscious trying to complete a forgotten story. Shadow work is not about becoming good, it's about becoming whole. Because wholeness includes both light and dark, both virtue and vice, both the divine and the damned within you. You cannot transcend what you refuse to face. Every emotion you exile will one day return as a symptom, a depression, a self-sabotage, or a repeating pattern until you learn its language. And yet, the journey is not meant to shame you, it's meant to liberate you. The shadow is not your enemy. It's the part of you that still holds your lost vitality, your suppressed creativity, your repressed capacity to love and to rage and to live. When you repress one, you repress all. Integration means retrieving those fragments, not to glorify the darkness, but to release the energy trapped inside it. You begin to realize the shadow is not darkness itself. It's the light you refuse to claim. And in that moment of recognition, when you stop running and turn inward, the real work begins. Asterisk. You begin to understand that shadow work is not an intellectual pursuit. It's not something you read about and master like a concept. It's an initiation. It's a descent into the interior world where words start to dissolve, where light and darkness blur, and where the self you thought you were begins to disintegrate. At first, it feels like being lost. The structures of your old identity, your values, your ambitions, your certainties start to crumble. You thought healing would feel peaceful, but instead it feels like madness. You question everything, your purpose, your relationships, your faith. You find yourself unable to tolerate the small talk, the shallow noise, the endless striving. It's as if your soul is detoxing from the persona you've been addicted to. This is what Jung described as enantiodromia, the turning of one thing into its opposite. The psyche, like nature, seeks balance. Whatever you've over-identified with, the unconscious compensates for by pulling you toward its opposite. If you've lived your life trying to be good, humble, selfless, your shadow will call forth your pride, your rage, your selfishness. If you've built your identity around control and reason, the unconscious will unleash chaos and emotion. The more extreme your persona, the more violent the return of its shadow. You may find yourself dreaming vividly, symbols, figures, scenes that defy explanation. A dark forest, a locked door, a wounded child. The dreams are not random. They are the language of the unconscious, dramatizing the very parts of you that long for recognition. To the rational mind, they seem absurd, but to the deeper intelligence of the psyche, they are maps. The descent begins when you stop interpreting your pain as punishment and start reading it as guidance. Every trigger, every loss, every failure becomes a teacher. The relationship that broke you open wasn't just tragedy, it was initiation. The loneliness you feel is not absence, it's space being made for the unknown, self to emerge. You begin to see how the unconscious communicates through synchronicities, those strange coincidences that seem too precise to be random. You think of someone and they call. You see the same image everywhere, the same phrase, the same archetype repeating through different faces. It's as if reality itself begins to mirror your inner process. Jung called this the transcendent function, the mysterious bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind. It's as though the psyche conspires to lead you toward wholeness, whether you consent or not. And yet, the descent is not without danger, because once the unconscious opens, everything repressed comes flooding out, not only personal memories, but collective ones. You begin to sense the deeper archetypal patterns behind your suffering. The victim, the rebel, the orphan, the trickster. You feel their presence within you, playing out through your moods and actions, as if your life were a theater and you, merely one of many actors. The ego resists this revelation. It wants to believe it's in control, that it's the author of its fate. But in shadow work, you learn that the ego is only the surface current. The ocean beneath moves according to a greater intelligence. The descent teaches humility because you realize how little you truly know about yourself. There comes a moment, quiet, terrifying, when you face what Jung called the night sea journey. Everything familiar vanishes. Your achievements mean nothing. Your relationships shift. You can no longer return to who you were, but you've not yet become who you are meant to be. This is the liminal space, the sacred paralysis between death and rebirth. Here, most people turn back. They cling to their old identities, their comforts, their distractions. They numb the process. But those who stay, who dare to keep descending, discover something extraordinary. Beneath the ruins of the old self lies an ancient intelligence, vast and compassionate. The same force that dismantled your illusions begins to guide you gently toward integration. It doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, sensations. You start to notice that your triggers soften when you meet them with awareness. The emotions you feared begin to transform when you stop resisting them. Anger reveals itself as a cry for boundaries. Sadness as love unexpressed. Fear as a protector of your vulnerability. Every emotion becomes alchemical, turning suffering into understanding. This is the real magic of shadow work. You begin to realize that you are not your thoughts, not your wounds, not even your history. You are the awareness that can hold them all. What you once called darkness is simply unlived life. And as you begin to integrate these parts, to listen instead of suppress, to feel instead of flee, something remarkable begins to happen. You sense a subtle vitality returning. Your voice deepens, your presence strengthens, your eyes soften. People notice it, they can't name it, but they feel it. It's authenticity, it's wholeness beginning to take form. But this is only the middle of the journey. The shadow has many layers, and the next will take you deeper into the realm of the inner child where the shadow was born. The descent has stripped you of your false masks. Now it will ask you to remember where they began. Because to heal the shadow, you must face the child who first learned to hide. Every shadow has a birthplace. It begins not in adulthood, but in childhood, in the fragile, impressionable years when you were still untouched by the masks of the world. You arrived here raw, radiant, unfiltered. You laughed too loud, cried too much, wanted everything. You loved without caution. You spoke truths that made adults uncomfortable. And slowly, piece by piece, you were taught what parts of you were acceptable, and what parts must be hidden to be loved. That's how the shadow is born, not from sin, but from adaptation. The psyche learns early that survival often requires betrayal of the self. The child discovers that love is conditional, based on obedience, performance, or silence. You learned to smile when you were sad, to stay quiet when you were angry, to be good when your soul wanted to scream. And each time you did, a small part of you went underground. Jung called this the process of repression, the exile of psychic contents into the unconscious. But for a child, it's not theory. It's heartbreak. It's confusion. It's standing in a room full of people and realizing that being authentic makes you unlovable. So you shapeshift. You build a mask, the persona. You become who they want you to be. The achiever, the caretaker, the comedian, the invisible one. And the parts of you that don't fit the image, the wildness, the sadness, the anger, are buried alive. But the psyche remembers. What is buried does not die. It waits. The child you silenced still lives within you, still longs for permission to exist. You might catch glimpses of them in unexpected moments when someone criticizes you and you overreact, not because of the words, but because they echo an old wound. When you sabotage intimacy because deep down you still fear abandonment. When you chase success not out of joy, but out of desperation to prove your worth to ghosts who no longer watch. These are not flaws. They are signals, messages from the exiled child, calling out for your attention. Jung called them complexes, clusters of emotion, memory, and belief that operate autonomously within the psyche. They hijack you, pulling you into behaviors that make no logical sense. You promise yourself you'll do better next time, but the pattern repeats because you are not dealing with reason. You're dealing with a child who has never felt safe enough to grow up. To do shadow work at this level is to parent that child, not with judgment, but with presence. To kneel before your own pain and whisper, "You were never wrong for feeling this way." This is not sentimental self-help. It's psychological alchemy. The adult self becomes the container through which the wounded child can finally feel what was once unbearable. In that re-experiencing, repression begins to dissolve. You'll notice it first as grief. The tears will come unexpectedly, not for what was done to you, but for what you had to become in order to survive it. You grieve the lost innocence, the spontaneous joy, the trust that was traded for vigilance. But grief, in Jungian psychology, is sacred. It's the fire that purifies the unconscious. Through it, the split parts begin to rejoin. There's a paradox here. Healing the inner child doesn't mean regressing into naivety. It means restoring the capacity for wonder while maintaining the strength of maturity. It's what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the integration of opposites into a living whole. You become both child and adult, both instinct and awareness, both vulnerability and wisdom. And yet, this integration is not linear. The child will test you. It will resist your compassion at first, because love once came with conditions. You'll hear the inner voice that says, "You don't deserve this. You're too broken." It's too late. That voice is not truth, it's memory. It belongs to the past. The work is to stay with it, to meet it without collapsing or fighting. Over time, the relationship changes. The child begins to trust you. You feel it in subtle ways. Your body relaxes, your reactions soften, your need for control diminishes. You find yourself laughing again, not because life has become easier, but because you've stopped rejecting half of yourself. The world looks less threatening, because the war inside has quieted. But the child holds not only wounds, it holds creativity, imagination, intuition. When it feels safe, those qualities return like spring after a long winter. You begin to write, to dance, to paint, to love without strategy. You rediscover play. You remember that healing was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. Still, even as you reclaim this innocence, the journey asks for more. Because the shadow is not only personal, it's collective. The next descent reveals the archetypal dimension, the realm of the collective unconscious, where your personal wounds intertwine with humanity's ancient patterns. The orphan within you connects to the archetype of exile that lives in all human souls. The oppressor within mirrors the forces of domination woven through civilization itself. And so, as your individual psyche heals, you begin to sense the larger movement, that personal transformation and collective evolution are not separate. To meet your own shadow is to touch the world's, and this realization changes everything. Because now, the question is no longer just who am I, but what is humanity becoming through me? When you begin to see your own shadow clearly, something unexpected happens. You start to see it everywhere. It's not just your anger or shame that frightens you anymore. It's the mirror of humanity itself. You look at the world and realize that what you found in yourself exists on a massive scale, multiplied across nations, systems, and centuries. Every war, every prejudice, every cruelty is a projection of what a collective has refused to face within itself. Carl Jung warned that the greatest danger to humanity was not an external enemy, but the unconsciousness of the collective. Because what we repress as individuals, we also repress as societies. The shadow of one becomes the shadow of all. We call it evil because it terrifies us, because it reminds us of our own capacity for destruction. But if the personal shadow contains disowned emotion, the collective shadow contains disowned humanity. You begin to see it in the way groups demonize others, in the hatred that binds people together, more tightly than love ever could. The need for a scapegoat is ancient. It's how tribes preserved their illusion of purity. Every ideology, no matter how righteous, casts a shadow. Religions preaching compassion create inquisitions. Nations founded on freedom build systems of control. Even movements for justice risk becoming what they oppose when they refuse to see their own darkness. It's unsettling at first. You want to take sides, to find a clear villain, but the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to separate good from bad. You realize that collective evil is not born from monsters. It's born from ordinary people who've split their humanity into fragments. The tyrant outside reflects the inner tyrant who craves control. The corruption in power mirrors the small corruptions of self-betrayal you justify each day. The collective shadow thrives wherever people refuse self-reflection. It feeds on polarization, on the hunger for certainty, for moral superiority, for belonging at any cost. It's easier to condemn the other than to see your own reflection in their flaws. But that denial keeps the wheel of suffering turning. Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking." The collective shadow grows strongest where love has been forgotten. To engage with it consciously is an act of immense courage. It doesn't mean excusing cruelty or staying silent before injustice. It means refusing to dehumanize even the ones who harm, because you understand that what is unhealed in them also lives in you. It's the same unconscious energy taking different forms. When you begin to see this, judgment softens into awareness, and awareness matures into responsibility. This is where shadow work evolves from therapy into service. Personal healing becomes political in the most intimate sense, not through ideology, but through consciousness itself. Each person who integrates their own darkness contributes to the slow alchemy of the world's healing. Because reality is relational, the psyche is not contained within the skull. Every time you make peace with a disowned part of yourself, you lessen the field of violence that humanity projects. But the process is not glamorous. The collective shadow will test your compassion by showing you horrors that seem unforgivable. You will feel rage, despair, disbelief. You will want to withdraw into cynicism, to numb yourself with irony or distraction. Yet the very act of staying awake, of refusing to look away, is sacred work. It's how consciousness expands. The psyche, both personal and collective, grows through the tension between opposites. You start to notice how this dynamic plays out in your own microcosm. In family systems, workplaces, communities, the same archetypes repeat. The hero, the victim, the persecutor. The same triangles of blame and redemption. You begin to sense that these aren't just human patterns, they're mythic forces living through us. Jung called them archetypes of the collective unconscious. They are older than history, and they move through every generation like invisible tides. To integrate the collective shadow means to live mythically, to recognize that your small life participates in an ancient story. The conflicts of the world echo within your own psyche. Every time you choose empathy over projection, you rewrite the myth just a little. Every time you face your fear, instead of denying it, you shift something in the collective field. The work is invisible, but its effects are real in time. You begin to feel a strange compassion for humanity, not the naive kind that overlooks evil, but a mature compassion that sees it as ignorance, as the absence of integration. You realize that civilization itself is in the midst of a great individuation process. The chaos of the modern world, the polarization, the crises, the noise, are symptoms of a species confronting its shadow. The earth itself mirrors this tension, trembling under the weight of our unconsciousness. But in the same way your personal darkness led you toward awakening, the collective darkness may be leading humanity toward a new form of consciousness. Shadow work, at the largest scale, is evolution. The question is whether we will cooperate with it or resist it until destruction forces the lesson. You begin to sense your place in this grand process, not as a savior, but as a participant. Your inner healing is not separate from the world's. To integrate your own shadow is to contribute, quietly but powerfully, to the healing of the collective psyche. It's not glamorous, it's sacred. You become a small point of consciousness through which the unconscious can finally see itself. And yet, this realization leads to another paradox, one that marks the final stage of the journey. For even as you expand into the vastness of the collective, you begin to feel the pull of something deeper still, the archetype of the self, the force behind all opposites, the totality of your being, and the hidden order behind all chaos. The self calls not for perfection, but for integration, a reconciliation of all that you've met within yourself. The descent into the shadow was never meant to end in darkness. It was meant to lead you back to the light, not the light that denies darkness, but the light born from it, because the shadow was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to complete you. And now, standing on the threshold between the personal and the transpersonal, you begin to feel it, the faint, radiant pulse of something whole, ancient, and unbroken at the center of your being. The self awaits. You have spent years wandering through the dark corridors of your own psyche, touching the walls of grief, desire, memory, and fear. You have faced the shadows that once ruled you from beneath awareness, and now, in the silence after the storm, something shifts. The darkness that once felt suffocating begins to feel alive. Not an enemy, but a field of possibility. It breathes with you. It listens. It waits the self. Jung's word for the totality of who you are does not speak in words, but in symbols. It hides in dreams, in the glint of sunlight across broken glass, in the sudden ache you feel when music brushes against an old wound. It is the center that holds the opposites together, the tension between who you think you are and who you have always been. And when you reach this threshold, you no longer battle your shadow. You begin to see through it. The work is not about purification. It is about integration, the sacred marriage of light and dark, of conscious and unconscious, of ego and self. The light that emerges from this union is not the cold light of control, but the warm radiance of understanding. You begin to see that your shadow was never a curse, but a teacher in disguise. Every fear, every resentment, every forgotten dream was a fragment of yourself, waiting for your embrace. There comes a moment when you realize the shadow doesn't dissolve, it transforms. Its weight becomes substance. Its silence becomes song. You see that healing isn't the end of suffering, but the awakening to its meaning. Pain becomes the threshold to depth, and depth becomes the door to God. The self reveals itself not as something to reach, but as something that has always been there, like a mirror waiting for the fog to clear. You start to feel time differently. The past no longer binds you. The future no longer haunts you. What remains is presence, timeless, still, vast. The ego kneels before it, not in defeat, but in reverence. This is not a surrender to something outside of you, but to what has been calling from within, all along the self, the axis mundi, the silent witness that holds your life in its gaze. You realize that your shadow was not the opposite of your light, but the womb that carried it. Like night carries the stars, your darkness was the space where the self could be born. You had to lose everything you thought you were to find the one thing that cannot be lost. This is the paradox of individuation, to die to the false and awaken to the whole.